Yes, hello. My name is Rob Miller. I'm with the Truman National Security Project here today to cover a quick course, about an hour long, Military 101, which is really an introductory level course to the military, military family life, culture, for really human resource organizations within businesses in the private sector who are looking to hire veterans transitioning into the private sector. Again, I'm with the Truman National Security Project, but this is being presented by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce through an organization called Hiring Our Heroes. Great organization, so great opportunity. We'll transition now to our second slide, which is just a quick intro on myself. Again, my name is Rob Miller. I served over 15 years in the United States Marine Corps, about 13 active duty. I then served some in the reserves. I made a transition. I now do commercial real estate in Washington, D.C. At a firm called Broad Street Realty. I also manage oil and natural gas company out of Oklahoma. And again, I'm a Truman political partner here at the Truman National Security Project. You can follow me on Twitter at Rob Miller USMC. I had the honor of not only being an enlisted Marine, which we'll cover later, but also an officer, infantry both times. Served twice in Iraq, to include the Battle of Fallujah. I really finished up my active duty time as a company commander aboard Parris Island, South Carolina, really focused on training our next generation of war fighters. And we'll begin Military 101. Next slide. So the Truman National Security Project focuses on all four aspects of national policy: diplomacy, development, defense, and democracy. Today I'm going to be focusing on defense, which is really within the national policy realm considered the option of last resort. Next slide. So I typically ask, what comes to mind when you think of our military, especially here in the United States? What comes to mind when you think of our military? And typically I will get, in this day and age, honor, integrity, dedication, a lot of real positive, what we consider motivational terminologies: on time, followers, leaders, go-getters, the whole nine yards. So we really get this gambit, and of course, at this day and age, we're seeing a very positive, robust feeling focused towards the United States military, towards our veterans' families, which is exciting and great, but it definitely gives us an opportunity to take a harder look at those specific attributes that our military members see. Now, when you ask somebody in the military, what do they think of when they think of military, you're going to get a different opinion. So we'll transition to our next slide. Now, in this slide, we always say, what do you see with this picture? This here, and you'll see a lot of people, very honorable, very dedicated, a lot of different references you'll see through this military. But to someone in the military, this uniform, this is the Army's officer. He's an infantry officer. He's wearing his infantry blues, and this is, within the military, this is a resume. So he is wearing everything that he's really ever done. On his lapels, he has the infantry cross rifle. Above his left breast pocket, he has the combat infantry badge, which says that he's served in combat. He has not only been engaged, but has engaged the enemy. He has jump wings. He has a heliborne assault badge. On his right, above his right breast pocket, he has foreign decorations. He also has foreign jump wings, which means he's actually jumped with a foreign entity. On his shoulder boards, he has his captain rank. And this is what we see when we see a military uniform. So within the military, we see a resume of everything they've ever done. And you can go through his ribbons and see what operations he's participated in and what he's done. Now, outside of the military, it just looks like obviously a very sharp, very focused military officer, as he should. So that perception is sometimes different. So it's a good piece. So there's a military culture that is distinctly different from the civilian workforce. So we'll transition to our next slide. So Military 101 serves as an introduction to your military, because of course the military serves the United States. Understanding military values, organization, cultures, and capability, providing answers to basic questions, and we'll talk about that later. Obviously, this is a recorded showing, but I'll leave my information if you ever need to reach out to me. You have specific questions, which I get all the time. And typically, we'll talk down persistent myths, and we really just try to empower organizations and businesses to reach out to ourselves and to our veterans within the community who they're looking to hire. So we'll transition to our next slide, which shows our agenda. We're going to briefly talk through organization of the military. We're then going to transition through and we'll talk through operations worldwide and operations that different specific military groups take part in. And then we'll talk about really the people, the individuals, and the family members. So transitioning to our next slide, which is Organization 101. And we'll move right in. Again, I'm Rob Miller. I'm with the Truman National Security Project. This is Military 101, sponsored by Hiring Our Heroes through the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. All right, we'll go to our next slide. All right, so now we see two military forces, and we like to say, what separates these two military forces? So on the left, United States military raising the American flag. On the right, that is the Pakistan military. Couple of different pieces. All right, so in Pakistan, the military is the dominant force in that country. Since the 1950s, they've had three major military coups, typically about every 20 years. So realistically, if you look at the numbers and you just look at, they're constantly in flux because their military is such a powerful entity within their country. Now, within the United States, our military is a civilian-led military. So our civilian is the commander-in-chief, who is duly elected President of the United States. He is in charge of the military. So when we talk about a civilian-led military, what specifically does that mean to our military per se? So we like to say, so what does that mean for every member in the United States military? As we transition to our next slide, our military is inherently apolitical and profoundly values-driven. Our military, again, is overseen by the Commander-in-Chief. The President is elected. Our service secretaries are appointed by the President, and they are confirmed by the President. In fact, we have laws on the book that make the military apolitical under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So for officers, it is Article 88 in the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which says that no officer can make contemptuous words towards, members of Congress, Senate, or anybody within the federal government. And then for enlisted, there's Article 134, which we refer to as the catch-all article. And this ensures that our service members are not authorized to make negative remarks towards their chain of command, which would be the President of the United States, Senate, and Congress. So again, service members swear an oath to the Constitution and the office of the President, not to a party or a particular president. The military, again, does not set policy, it executes policy, which leads us to our next slide. And this is always a big one. We like to say, what's wrong with this picture? Right here we have Congresswoman Virginia Foxx, obviously not knowing the issues with this photo here. This is obviously a political, a political event of some kind, when in fact uniforms and politics do not mix. And again, we go back to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It's not authorized. So obviously these Marines should know better, and they obviously just got caught up in the moment. The difference is those Marines can be held responsible. I mean, so when I was talking with businesses and organizations, if you ever do any form of political event, you want to make sure that no one shows up for your events in military attire, because then they, in essence, are trying to say that they represent the military as a whole, and the United States military is apolitical. So again, we always say, so why does this really matter? Well, let's go to our next slide. So in the military, our values are a matter of life and death. So, within the Army, we talk about the 7 official Army values: loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, personal courage. Now, in the Marine Corps, we keep it simple. It's 3: honor, courage, and commitment. But we also have, within the Marine Corps, our 14 leadership traits. It's justice, judgment, decisiveness, integrity, dependability, tact, initiative, enthusiasm, bearing, unselfishness, courage, knowledge, loyalty, and endurance. And so these are really ground into our service members from day one, whether they went to boot camp as enlisted or they went to officer training. Either way, this is something that they learn from the moment they enter service until the day they die. Because once they leave the service, these values have been so ingrained in them that they will not forget them, and they will carry with them forward. So the interesting piece is that within the civilian world, when we talk about duty, if you're late to work, you're late to work. But if you're serving in Iraq, Afghanistan, if you're serving in the Middle East, in Africa, if you're serving somewhere and you're late in combat, people's lives are on the line, and your service members, those that you fight with, right, left, they could be hurt by your inaction and your lack of attention to detail. So, very important, the success and survival of individual service members, organizations, and the democracy they defend depends upon them. So they take it very seriously. So we like to say, so who's in control? And we'll take it to our next slide. So civilian command and control. So number one, the President of the United States, democratically elected. If you look at his advisors on the left and right, so his National Security Council, they're appointed by the President. On the right are the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, appointed by the President, confirmed by the Senate. Secretary of the Defense, appointed by the President, confirmed by the Senate. The same thing with the 3 service departments and the Joint Chiefs. They are all appointed by the President and certified by the Senate. And the same thing down here in the bottom center, which are the Unified Combatant Commanders. Now, they are inherently probably some of the most powerful individuals on the planet. They are appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. So, civilian elected, clearly using that civilian control to run the military and ensure that it continues to move forward. So we'll transition to our next slide, and we'll talk about the combatant commands. Combatant commands are how the military breaks up the world. So the military, basically every square inch, including space, is broken down into a combatant commander. And those combatant commanders are typically 4-star rank, so they are admirals, generals, and they oversee huge portions of the earth, including all military infrastructure, bases, personnel, or any combat that may take place in there. Now, within this slide, and sometimes it's a little difficult, I apologize, but so the red lines, how the world is broken down to the Unified Combatant Commanders. Now, the color blocks, if you look through here, the color blocks are actually how the State Department breaks up the world. Now, as you can see, there's a very clear conflict because the State Department has the world broken down differently than the military does. It's a very interesting transition because you'll find that say in Africa, the combatant commander for Africa his budget is off the charts, billions and billions of dollars per year, whereas an ambassador or a State Department individual within a specific country or even that region has a very small budget comparatively so. So the Unified Combatant Commanders are they're super powerful. So the selection for those Unified Combatant Commanders is a very strict and very time-consuming process, and their staffs likewise. So we'll transition to our next slide. The military is deployed worldwide, and this is just a great graph to show you where we have our troops. Obviously, we have a lot at sea, constantly through the world, projecting American power forward. Combat operations are really just small portions of the picture. We have advisors all through the world. We have a lot of different military personnel who are assisting other countries in training, whether it be in the Republic of Georgia and numerous other places. So this is pretty much ongoing at all times. This just gives you a good breakdown of where our troops are, and they are pretty much everywhere. So we'll transition to our next slide. So each of our services has its own mandate. So the Army, very large-scale, long-term ground operations. The Air Force is air and space operations. The Navy, naval security, transportation, and force protection, really projecting via the sea, projecting American power forward. The Marine Corps, first to fight, rapid naval deployments and ground operations. The Coast Guard, shore operations. Of course, the Coast Guard now falls under Homeland Security. But make no mistake, there's definitely some friendly overlap and friendly competition within our services. Next slide. All right, so when you're talking to the military, not all military personnel are soldiers. And just be careful, because in fact some services will take offense, right? So within the Army, they're soldiers. Within the Navy, they're sailors. The Air Force, they're airmen. And within the Marine Corps, they are Marines, capital M. Again, that's just that rivalry piece. And the Coast Guard, they are Coast Guardmen. Now, using the correct term is typically, it's what you want to do just to show that you care enough to understand that they're in a different branch of service, and B, understanding the different branches just gives you a little more credibility when you're dealing with someone. No one expects you, if you've never served in the military, to understand the ins and outs of the specific struggles in the life and the training and whatnot, but it definitely shows that you appreciate their service and you care. When in doubt, use service member. There's nothing wrong with that. I've been to lots of events in uniform years ago and out of uniform where individuals refer to me as a service member because they didn't specifically know. Nothing wrong with that. So we always say, why does this matter? Well, worst case scenario is you appear unknowledgeable or out of touch. So we always like to say that just focusing on who they are, and when in doubt, service member shows that at a minimum you care enough to understand that they've served in the service, and again, if thanking them for the service is good, but it's considered just basic knowledge. So we'll go to our next slide. The military also has reserve forces, and they are mobilized in times of war. So Army National Guard is in all 50 states, and those are commanded by their state governors. The Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines have reserve forces, and they are federally commanded. So they fall within the Department of Defense in their respective services. Reserve and Guard units train 1 weekend a month, or 2 weeks during the summer, typically 2 weeks a year, and they can be activated for longer durations. Now, this was done many, many years ago, back in the 50s. In the Army, what the Army did is the Army placed a huge chunk of its logistics in the reserves, so that if the Army was forced to push forward for any extended war, they would be required to call up their reserve force, thereby forcing every member of Congress who has a reserve unit in their area to make that vote to send individuals from their area out to war. So again, we're a all volunteer force in this day and age. So the draft was obviously stopped in 1970. So huge volunteer force. Same thing with our reserves, but of course calling up the reserves takes a little bit more. It's a little bit more difficult to call up the reserves and send them forward because it's very noticeable in your hometown. So it's definitely a big piece. So we like to say following 9/11, we'll go to the next slide. The Guard and Reserve have been busy. This is the old joke for the Guard and Reserve, 1 weekend a month, my ass. Clearly the Guard and Reserve has been worked extremely hard. And I think we've seen 6-month, 8-month, 12 and 14-month deployments for reserve units overseas, obviously pulled out of their day jobs at home and pushed forward into combat. So We've definitely seen this now. We have been scaling this back pretty aggressively. A lot of reserve units are ceasing to deploy overseas. I think there may still be a few who are forward deployed, but the majority of our reserves have backed down, and we're in the process of really consolidating and fixing our gear within the military. So we'll see that transition back to normalcy here in the next few years, depending on operation tempo. We'll go to our next slide. All right, there are two types of service members. There's enlisted and they're commissioned. Now, as you can see here, the majority of our service are enlisted. And the key difference between enlisted and officer is how they enter the service. So if you look here, so our junior enlisted is 56% of our military force, and they're typically going to be those that serve under 4 years. 28% of our force are our non-commissioned officer, and they're going to be, either your 4 to, they're going to be anybody above 4 years, but typically your NCOs, the majority of them are going to be your 4 to 12 years non-commissioned officers, or they're going to be your, what we call senior enlisted. They're going to be your long-term professional enlisted, who are your sergeant majors, your master sergeants, your individuals who have made a lifetime out of serving in the enlisted corps. Now, 15% is going to be your officer corps, and they will have been commissioned after attending college, and they will be, really in charge of the entire force. And then that really small slice, 1%, those are your Chief 1 officer, your limited duty officers. They specifically are officers who fill a very specific niche, whether they be in the Army. Your Chief 1 officers, a lot of pilots. In the Marine Corps, there are a lot of logistics, nuclear, biological, chemical officers. So they fill a very small niche, and they typically are long-term career warrant officers. So we'll transition to our next slide. Our enlisted, considered the backbone of the military. Now, this is a few of the Marine Corps ranks, from private first class all the way up to first sergeant. That's not all the ranks, and as you'll see through the slideshow at the very end, there are plenty of reference materials that you can get either through Hiring Our Heroes, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, or you can reach out to me and I can make sure you get that reference material, and I'll pass all my information off at the end. But again, so the enlisted is really kind of the backbone of our force. They're an all-volunteer force, and they have, every one of them has raised their right hand and volunteered to serve their country, volunteered to go to boot camp, and volunteered to do a basic term of enlistment, which is, all things being equal, about 4 years. So they say, for the next 4 years, I will stand at attention and I will serve my country. So all volunteer force, they go to boot camp, they're trained, and then they're set forth and they execute their mission. We'll go to the next slide, which are commissioned officers. Commissioned officers lead the fight. So this is the Navy. So commissioned officers are commissioned by the President of the United States after they complete any one of our officer programs, whether it be ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps. They go to one of the service academies, whether they go to West Point, Naval Academy, the Air Force Academy, or they go to college, and then they go to an officer candidate school, and they learn the ins and outs of being an officer within the military. Now, again, their duties are to lead and provide oversight, supervision, and guidance for the operating force. We'll transition to our next slide. So what is the difference between a lieutenant and a lieutenant colonel? And this is a big question. When I talk to a lot of businesses, they always call, I email back and forth with different groups, and they say, I have a guy, he's coming here, he's a lieutenant colonel, or he's a captain, he's got so many years in, he said he was a company commander, or he was a battalion commander. What does that mean? What does that mean? And this is a good general breakdown. Okay, so it's a little bit different for the Navy side and the Air Force. It's just a little bit different, but this is a good general piece. So if you look at the very bottom, a fire team leader would be a corporal in the Marine Corps or Army, and he would typically have between 2 and 3 years in the service, maybe 4 years. and he would be in charge of 3 to 4 people. And this is, when I say in charge of, this isn't 9 to 5. This is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, ensuring everybody's in the right uniform, ensuring everybody's trained for their profession, taking people out in town and helping them, pay their bills, helping them get a house, many different things. So full 100% leadership. When you look at a squad leader, this is typically a sergeant. Now, a sergeant's going to have anywhere between 7 to 12, 13 years, and they're going to be in charge of 9 to 12 different troops. And again, this is, they're going to have 3 fire teams underneath them. So you're going to have 3 fire team leaders. So all told, they're going to have about 12 troops that they're in charge of every day, 24 hours a day. They're responsible for on the weekend. They're responsible during Christmas, all the time. The responsibility never ends. A platoon commander, a lieutenant, probably 1 to 2 to maybe 3 years in the military, is going to have typically 35 to 45 troops that they specifically are in charge of. Now this as a lieutenant, he's going to have 3 squad leaders. Then each squad leader is going to have 3 fire team leaders. That lieutenant's going to have a senior advisor who's going to be a staff sergeant or a gunnery sergeant with 12, 14 years in the service. And that's interesting. So when we talk about that leadership piece, when I was a young lieutenant in the Marine Corps, I took Marines out in town so they could get a loan to buy a ring so they could go get engaged and married. I took them out in town to help them pay their bills so they could stay in their house. So I took them places. So we talk about the all-encompassing leadership. It's definitely not a 9 to 5. So company commander, typically it's going to be a captain who's going to have 10 to 12 years, and they're going to be, have anywhere from, 150 to 250 troops. And then battalion commander, colonels 18 plus years is going to have anywhere from 650 to 1,000. And then, of course, once you go above Army Brigade, Marine Regiment Colonel, up to General, this is going to be, this is your senior executive level. So the best way I always look at it is your bottom 2, your squad and your fire team leader. These are typically your shift managers. These are the guys who you can put in, and they'll either A, they'll be on a shift, or B, they'll be in charge of a first shift, second shift, third shift. They'll be in charge of 10, 12 different people. Your lieutenant, that's typically like a district manager. Again, he's going to be in charge of multiple different people. Your company commander would be considered realistically, the president of a region or an organization. Your lieutenant colonel is going to be kind of like the CEO of that company, that organization, and then once you move above that, your colonel and above. These are your chairmen of the boards. These are the guys that are there. They're there for the wisdom and advice. So they're out there. So that's just a great way to break it down. Of course, responsibility is more than 22 times as many lives. So good. That's a good breakdown. We'll transition to operations. Next slide. We'll begin talking about operations moving forward. Again, Rob Miller with the Truman National Security Project. This is Military 101. We'll go through some of the specifics. Going to transition here into operations again, sponsored by Hiring Our Heroes through the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Next slide. So the military views force as a last resort. The myth, the military likes to make war. The fact is, again, it's complicated. Military personnel are trained experts in the application of violence, but of course they are the first to see its effects. So, number one, the military likes to train and fight, and we like to fight to win. Make no mistake about it. Nobody joins the military. Most people don't join the military not to fight. Most people that join the military want to fight for their country. They want to protect their country at the very core of their being. And that's why they stand up and say, I will go do this. It is a choice that I've made. I will go and do it. Again, honor, courage, and service, those core values are what drive them moving forward. But again, we talk about, making war. We talk about this fighting. Again, it is as a last resort. We always say that officers never run in combat. and officers don't shoot in combat. And I had a great discussion with a business probably about a week ago. We talked about the concept of officers eat last, leaders eat last, right? It's to show that that your troops, who are always out there on the front lines, the tip of the spear, they are the most important effort. And as their leader, you're going to put all of your effort behind them to make sure they succeed. Because if they succeed, well, then you'll succeed. So it all ties in together. So again, it's a complicated piece, but everybody likes to train to fight and fight to win. So how do you keep that concept, that how do we focus on war being kind of the last resort? So we'll go to our next tool, our next slide. So in the military, you talk about, they say to drop a dime, the tools of national power, or instruments of national power. Instruments of national power. So this is the military's version of the 4 Ds, which we talked about at the very beginning, right? So we talk about dropping a dime. We talk about diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. So diplomatic is treaties and agreements. Those are your soft powers. That's how you deal with countries and organizations overseas. Informational, these are your strategic, and that typically is kind of going to be world opinion. How does the world at large view the United States conducting some military operation, whether it's humanitarian aid or actually a military conflict somewhere? Military power, which is operational, and that's typically going to be your actionable intelligence. That's, we know where Osama bin Laden is, go get him. We know where this bad group is, let's go get them. Let's, shoot them with a drone. So that's that military piece. And then economic, which again is foreign aid, which is a huge piece that really gets overlooked. But again, foreign aid is something that projects long-term, 5, 10, 15 years down the road, can solve conflicts by spending minor amounts of money in this day and age. So military leaders are often the first people to call for the use of non-military tools, whether diplomatic, informational, especially the economic. So during any conflict, even if there is military conflict, all of these things are taking place at all times. Diplomatic is always pushing forward, informational is pushing forward, and economic is always pushing forward in an effort to reduce the level of military conflict. So let's go to our next slide. We always say that violence is the core element of armed conflict. And why is that? Well, power is projected worldwide by the threat of boots on the ground. And we are our Navy is forward deployed, projecting air power. But at the end of the day, it is the concept that an American boot is going to stand on your ground and take charge that, of course, projects that power forward. It's true at all times and all places, regardless of technology. Boots on the ground is that long-term threat. So what does this do to the lonely service member who's actually on the ground, right? We'll go to our next slide. We talk about our service members because, again, war is a deeply human activity. It's not just a political or strategic one, right? It's much more than the continuation of politics or policy by other means. You'll hear this a lot. People will say, oh, it's politics by other means, which means boots on the ground, right? But again, war is life and death. It's anger and despair. It's, service members have to live with this concept of other means, right? So anytime we talk about putting boots on the ground somewhere, we are talking about real Americans standing on the ground fighting our fights. And there's nothing wrong with that. We train to fight, we fight to win. But there is a cost. So let's not forget that. And we'll transition to our next slide and we'll talk about the spectrum of armed conflict. So here we go in the spectrum of armed conflict. You have, from terrorism all the way to nuclear war, and it kind of breaks it down. So between terrorism and insurgency is Afghanistan, between insurgency and between insurgency and limited conventional warfare, that would be like Vietnam, Gulf War, Korea, and World War II. And then this is just a good transition. Now we can talk about the weapon systems that our military brings to the table. Next slide. So the U.S. military capabilities across the broad spectrum. And again, this is always kind of an evolving piece. So when we talk about terrorism, we're talking about, our special forces elements, real small units, highly trained, on the ground, very strategic. We talk about drone warfare, limited strikes, really focused on small cells, small insurgents. As we transition forward towards limited conventional conflict, now you're talking boots on the ground. You're talking air power projected forward. As you see here, aircraft carrier. We actually have an A-10 on there. I think we've actually cut those from the military. I don't know if we're going to get those back, but that's a tank killer. But so now you're talking heavy duty air power, gaining air superiority, major theater warfare, tanks on the ground. You're talking subs. I mean, so as you transition up all the way up to the concept of nuclear war. So this is kind of this military spectrums and the capabilities. But then the problem is of course, everything changes. So we'll go to our next slide. And the spectrum of armed conflict is truly evolving. And I think we've seen this with 9/11, and this is this concept, and this is what keeps these card carrying smart guys and gals up all night, really thinking about what's that next threat. That the concept that a terrorist organization can get their hands on a nuclear weapon, right? I mean, this is what keeps people worried, and so this has been the focus, right? I mean, this is the next generation where we're really focused on our special warfare elements, our drones, and our intelligence capabilities worldwide in an effort to deny this from evolving all the way. So what do we do to combat this spectrum? All right, we'll go to our next slide. And that's kind of the question is, are these tools enough? And we talk about bringing it back to dropping a dime, right? Diplomacy, informational, military, and then economic. And at the end of the day, it's about utilizing those assets and that technology to ensure that we can attempt to, de-evolve this conflict as they arise throughout the world. So we'll go to our next slide. And we talk about getting left of bag. And this is when we talked about dropping a dime. We are talking about decreasing the level of conflict that we see in numerous places across the world. I mean, at the end of the day, so on one side at the far end, you have domestic relief. And then at the super far right, you have strategic nuclear warfare. Okay, so those couldn't be any further apart. But in the middle is where we really have existed, right? So the bottom one, the bottom black line, this is really kind of your peacemaking, peace-building, show of force, counter-drug insurgency, sanctions enforcement. But all of these, they maintain some inherent risk. So when you're all the way down at the end at domestic civil support, I mean, that's obviously not inherently militaristic, very dangerous. But as you move forward, it gets more dangerous until all of a sudden you hit the top black line, which is your counterinsurgency, your strikes, raids, limited conventional conflict. So what we want to do, and everybody in the military is really kind of, we want to be left of bag, right? We want to be, even if we're standing on the ground with weapons, providing that security assistance, we want to be in a position where there's no requirement to shoot people. That's always very positive. Don't want to shoot people if we don't have to. But obviously, as soon as it transitions to the right, well, the spectrum has gone up, and then we got to spend the rest of our time trying to damp it back down and get left of bag. That's where we want to be. So that's a good breakdown for that. Now let's transition to the next one, which is our civilian-military partnership. And I don't know how many times when I was in Iraq, did a lot of work, especially initially with a lot of NGOs, non-governmental agencies, organizations, really trying to build infrastructure. Now definitely things get pretty hot, and your military has to be there to really provide the safety and the framework for those organizations to expand. But these are great partnerships from intelligence, diplomacy, developmental logistics. Make no mistake, the military cannot do it alone. And you really have to have those civilian-military partnerships because they are what create that stabilized environment that allow us to get left of bank. And we'll go to our next slide. Now let's talk about people. So our people in the military, and this is all, this is a good intro, but when we talk about our people within the military, this is the nuts and bolts. Our military service members, they are everything within our military. They're the lifeblood, they're the history, they're the future. So it really is the main focus of efforts. So let's go to our next slide. All right, so every service member is a volunteer. I don't know, this slide got kind of messed up, but the difference is, so who volunteers for this, right? Diving in the mud, nasty. Who does this? Well, and again, this is your, especially on your enlisted side, these are typically your young, late teens, early 20s. These are your individuals who really find themselves very focused on with the drive to serve their country. And I'm not saying that everybody doesn't have that in different ways, but within the military, this is typically what we see. This is your men and women who, for whatever reason, find a drive moving forward that the military for them is either a huge opportunity for them to kind of prove to themselves, or it may be an escape for them to get out and get more independence. But when I was a company commander at Parris Island years ago, really saw just this great generation of young men and women just really flowing into service, even during the time of war. They knew they were going to serve in war. And yet they raise their hand and they say, yes, I will serve my country. It's a great thing. So we'll transition to our next slide. So again, today the military is less than 1% of the U.S. population. You compare that with World War II, 14 to 15%. Vietnam, 6 to 7. Now, both of those were most definitely, that because of the draft. Even the Second World War. We had. This was a world war. So our entire infrastructure in the United States was focused on war. Vietnam, the draft obviously was continuing, was not removed until the late 70s, but we had much shorter enlistments during the Vietnam time, whereas in this day and age, your average enlistment is 4 years, and then you'll have that core senior enlisted officer corps that will basically stay for 20, 30, 40 years. Transition to our next slide. Only 25% of the population between 17 and 24 are eligible to enlist in this day and age. And this is for a lot of reasons, but it's definitely been a concern that I know I've had discussions at length with different organizations and businesses and military leaders. And this is individuals have a felony. They have drugs on their records. They have all kinds of problems, or they have they've taken some type of pharmaceutical drug for some reason in high school or middle school, and that makes them ineligible to serve. There's also a huge push, obviously, because you have to be within a fighting weight. So if you're overweight, you're not going to make it in. If you're super underweight, you're not going to make it in either. You'll see a lot of, especially young enlisted troops that want to get in. They're going to be either gaining weight or losing weight to try to make weight to get into the service. Restrictions are stringent and qualifications are very high. So we'll kind of break some of this down. Let's go to the next slide. So the military is educated. You see here. So for our enlisted, pretty much everybody's got a high school education. You're going to have some that have GEDs, but by and large, almost all of them are going to have a high school diploma. Your officer corps, everybody's got a high school diploma. For your college degree, virtually 99.9% of all your officers have college degrees in this day and age. But you'll see not so much on the enlisted side, but you will have a core group of your enlisted that will have it. It's just definitely not as much. So as you can see in the officer corps, definitely above on both sections, enlisted definitely high up on the high school diploma realm. So we'll transition to our next slide. So military recruits definitely come from predominantly your middle class families, and we can talk through income and whatnot. But this just shows you, based in '09, and really, I mean, a whole lot hasn't transitioned in this time frame. I mean, we might see a slight shift in the next few years with the downsizing of the military, but I think we're going to see kind of a stable slice of America continuing to serve within our military. This just gives you a good breakdown. Next slide. And as can be expected, our military is very young. I mean, this is when we talk about our young enlisted military members, which are, again, the backbone of our military. I mean, their first enlistment, you're going to have some of those between 18 and 25, and that's going to be the core of our military. Once you get between 25 and 30, those are going to be your NCOs, who are really there to make it happen. And then once you go above 30 and 40, these are your long-term professionals, and they're going to be the ones who are your senior enlisted, and then your senior officer corps, who are really setting policy, having served 20, 30, 40 years in the military, and married. Most definitely, a lot of married members in this day and age. And that is definitely a transition from the 1950s and the 1960s. So a lot more junior military members that join and then get married, have families. So, I mean, down the road, I've had discussions, because this obviously is a different it's a different subject altogether, but it definitely ties into the VA. It ties into our military infrastructure, paying for families and taking care of families. So there's a whole piece in there with this growing the military force. So it's definitely an issue out there, but it provides a lot of opportunities too. Next slide. And again, the military is nearly ethnically representative of the U.S. population. I mean, there's a slight here and there, but if you take a look, you'll see there's more African Americans within the military, but there's a little bit less Hispanic. So definitely kind of a transition there, but across the board, comparatively, very representative. Next slide. Now, the military is definitely mostly male, and I know there's been a huge transition in the process of transitioning our female veterans into a lot of different combat arms MOSs. So I know there's a lot of studies, there's a lot of things taking place right now, depending on whichever service is doing it. But make no mistake, I mean, currently the military is very, 80+% male. And this transition will probably take generations to adjust itself, if at all. But it's definitely, there's a lot going on right now to see about that transition moving forward. So next slide. This is somewhat kind of a difficult slide, because this is typically percentage of population based on population density. So it's a little tough to see, right? So I mean, it looks like Colorado, looks like Wyoming is Wyoming, Montana are off the chain. It just means there's, per density, there's more military members in that area. Obviously, California is going to have a lot of military members numbers-wise, but population density, this is what this breakdown. There's another group out there, Center for New American Security, which has actually done a huge piece, their big data project on veterans, where they're actually breaking down veterans, per county or congressional district, really focused on VA and Veterans Affairs issues. So there's a lot of information out there, and we'll be bringing that forward as it gets more refined. Next slide. Now this is it's a little older, 2010, from Blue Star Families. Great lady named Kathy Roth Duquette actually served with her husband at Parris Island. Many veterans feel civilians don't understand their service and sacrifice, and of course that makes complete sense. There's no question there. But I think that 92% of military families feel that the general public doesn't truly understand or appreciate. I think it's a tough one there. I think understanding the sacrifices of military families is extremely difficult. So when I was deployed in Iraq, my my wife never watched the news. She was just so petrified. She didn't want to see what was taking place in the news. And I think that's understandable, but at the same time, I think appreciating the military service and the military families, I think it's something that needs to just be explained a little better. But I think in this day and age, just the numbers I've seen and the people I've talked to, I find there's a very positive feeling towards military members and family members. So I think this is an interesting piece to know, but at the same time, I think there's a very positive approach to our military and service members in this day and age. Next slide. The values that our military members they carry forward, right? Within the military, a lot of teamwork. Privilege should help the underprivileged. A lot of leadership at that small unit level. Really working as a team. Communities should take care of each other. Can leave no one behind. Commitment to doing the right thing. Respect for merit. Disdain for unearned privilege. That is an absolute truth within the military. So a lot of very focused leadership, ground level stuff. Freedom. Protecting the weak. This is a big focus within our military, and this is what, these are some of the soft skills that our military and our veterans bring to the table. Next slide. So, and again, we always say that our military veterans, their values have been tested, right? This is an incredible shot from the Battle of Fallujah, 2004. These guys this is a group from actually Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 8th Marines. The guy on the deck is Sergeant Lonnie Wells. He didn't make it. That's Doc Lambote, and Gunnery Sergeant Shane is the one on the far left who's being shot. Incredible Marines. I was about a block and a half away when this took place, and this is a group struggling and really putting their lives on the line no matter what to save each other. And so this just when we talk about those values being tested, we are coming out of, years and years and years of war and conflict, and our military members, they're ready to take that focus and that dedication and transition it into the civilian world. And so that's really what we want to see is to make that great transition. Next slide. So within the Truman National Security Project, the Truman members really kind of have a whole different gambit. So it depends on what you're trying to do, right? So the Truman National Security Project has our military veterans within our Defense Council, and they're focused typically within the government, the Department of Defense, the State Department, and they're focused on defense industry type issues. We have policy experts, which we refer to as our card-carrying smart people, guys and gals. And they're the ones who are writing the big picture items, thinking long-term, conflicts and issues and budgets, big time right there. And then we have what we call our political professionals, who are those that are kind of out there on the ground, working with, campaigns, organizations, nonprofits, really focused on moving national security issues forward. So the Truman National Security Project, definitely a great organization. Love to take a part of it. And this really kind of ends the Military 101. I was told to keep it under an hour. I tried to do my best. Again, I want to thank you for kind of reaching out and taking part in seeking out the knowledge to hire our veterans moving forward into the organization, into businesses, community. I give this Military 101 in person a lot to a lot of HR representatives for groups, and who are really focused on, again, making that transition and tapping into this great veteran population we have, but not just veterans. Really, we talk about veterans, we want to talk about the whole family, right? So not just veterans, but also veterans' wives or service members' wives if they're continuing to serve. This is a great values-driven group that is very dedicated, who, when transitioning into the workforce, can be a super great asset to any organization. So I think it's great that you guys have taken the time to kind of take this. Would love to talk to you guys again. I'm Rob Miller. I'm with the Truman National Security Project. I'm a political partner, and this Military 101 has been presented by Hiring Our Heroes through the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And I'll give you my email if you have specific questions moving forward, considering, Military 101 or specific questions, or I mean, I review resumes for people. I help organizations kind of talk through how you make the transition from a military resume to a civilian. How do you transfer those hard skills and soft skills from the military into the civilian world? So I do a lot of that, and there's a lot of great programs out there, and I lead a lot of people in the right direction. So again, my name's Rob Miller, and I'll give you my email. It's robmiller0302 at gmail.com. That's a great, that's my personal email. You can hunt me down with that. But again, it's robmiller0302 at gmail.com. So again, feel free to reach out to me if you have any issues. And again, thank you for kind of taking the time to look through the Military 101. If you have any further questions, I would love to help you out. If you're in the process of looking to hire veterans or military family members into your organizations, I would love to help you in any way possible. I think it's a great cause and a great effort, and I think this is an untapped workforce that will help our country move forward. So again, thank you, excuse me, and thanks to Hiring Our Heroes and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and I hope you have a great day.